Yeah, and I think it's
Microphone 1, test, test. Microphone 2, test, test. Hello. Hello, everyone. Hello, welcome. Wow, this is a lovely crowd. Thank you all for being here. My name is Warren Davis. I assume most of you know that, or you wouldn't be here, right? Before we get started, and I'd like to introduce my...
Well, we're gonna come to the big round of applause.
Yeah.
What's a special thing you like to do to the audience?
So I would love, first of all, I'd love to take your picture. So I'm going to do that. But now, if you would indulge me, if everyone could pretend that this has been the most boring speech you've ever heard and all pretend to be asleep, fast asleep, eyes closed, drool if possible, I'd love to take that picture. Is that okay? So everybody
They were very quick to do
look
that,
very
actually.
quickly like you're just completely disinterested and asleep. Oh, thank you so much. Look at that. You're fantastic. Thank you. All right, take it away.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's just gone 2 o'clock. I've been told by Andy to wait till 5 past. So thank you so much for coming. If you need to use the facilities, please do, and we will start in a couple of minutes.
Well, I didn't know that.
You can take another picture if you want to drooling.
Oh, I didn't get a picture of you drooling.
Come at the end, Warren. Come at the end.
No, we won't have time. We might as well get that now. Good. So just look like you're just completely asleep. Oh,
Droopy.
is Madeline here? I heard you found the Cubert? Yes? You found it? How'd you do? Wait, say again? You'll work on it. You'll work on it. What time are we waiting for? 2:05? Wow. This is going to be the longest 2 minutes any of you have ever experienced.
Pretend to be asleep.
I'll pretend to be asleep. Hey, happy Sunday, Blackpool! Thank you so much for coming to hear some very interesting stories about old video games. My name's Paul Drury. I write for Retro Gamer. I've been ably assisted by my mate Martin Cowler, also writes for Retro Gamer. I also co-host the Ted Dabney Experience podcast, a little plug there. And actually, today's guest was the very first guest on our show. I'm very proud about that. But I was actually thinking of something, Warren, as I was walking around that hall, crammed full of video games. I started thinking, every single one of those games has got a story behind it. A story about where the idea started, how it changed, how it evolved, how maybe the designer didn't quite deliver what he wanted to deliver, and all the challenges on the way. Every single one of those games has got a story. So I thought, you know what would be good? If I could get someone who'd been making games for 4 decades to tell us about some of the stories behind the games, to take us behind the scenes of some of his games. Ladies and gentlemen, he's come all the way from California. Can we give a huge Blackpool welcome to Mr. Warren Davies? Now, actually, Warren, I understand that you actually live in Los Angeles, the city of light. Well, how apt, because Blackpool is also the city of light. So how would you say the two places compare, Los Angeles and Blackpool?
They don't.
Are we winning?
Well, I, as you know, Paul, I absolutely adore Blackpool. This is my first time here, but it reminds me of my childhood. I grew up near Coney Island in New York City. Coney Island is very small compared to Blackpool. Blackpool is huge, but Blackpool does remind me of the New Jersey shore towns like Ocean City and Atlantic City, which I adore. I absolutely love being by the ocean. I love the amusement parks. I love all the tourist traps and the terrible food. That is very nostalgic for me, and I felt very much at home here when I was touring.
Can I testify to that? Warren was the most enthusiastic visitor to Blackpool there's been for a while. Okay, we need to get him on the tourist board. Now, it's interesting though, Warren, because you mentioned about going to Coney Island and other places where there'll be amusement parks. And of course, with amusement parks come video games. Now, we're going to take you behind the scenes of 5 of Warren's game. And the first one that we've got playing in the background here is one that I'm sure all of our audience will have heard of. Cuba. Now, this was your first game.
Correct.
Your first game. Your first published game, at least. But surely, I mean, if you produce such a huge hit like this, I presume that you'd spent many, many years before maybe making games on a home micro in your bedroom, something like that. Is that what it was like?
No.
No? You mean you'd never made a video game before this one?
No, but nor had many people. It was 1982 was when I was hired by Gottlieb with no experience, but I had a master's degree in electrical engineering. So I knew something about computers and I knew something about computer programming. I knew little bits of computer graphics stuff, such as it was in that time, because again, 1982 computer graphics were pretty much in their infancy. But I'd always loved video games. The first video games came out about 10 years prior, about 1972, 73. I actually went to university for my freshman year, 1973. And I remember the first game, Pong, in computer space, came into our arcade. We'd never seen anything like it before. The idea of interacting with a TV screen was a completely foreign notion. TVs were completely non-interactive before that. So I was fascinated, and I thought, oh, how do you get a job making those games? Even as a child, with a fascination about computers, which were room-sized when I was a child, I always liked the idea of using a computer for entertainment purposes. I didn't want to do science. I didn't want to necessarily send people to the moon. I was like, how can we use these to have fun?
I think that's what Eugene Jarvis said, the only legitimate use of a computer is to play games, which you certainly did. I am really interested that then you got to Gottlieb, they gave you a chance. I don't think there was a design document that said make this game that will become Qbert.
Correct.
So
yes.
was there an actual moment looking back when Qbert began? Was there a key moment?
Sure, yes. It started out as an exercise, a programming exercise. I was just teaching myself how to program randomness, how to program gravity, So, hence the balls. It really started with balls bouncing down a pyramid of cubes. But then people at the office, as they were wont to do, wandering around, seeing what other people were working on, looked at it and goes, "Oh, that looks really cool." So then I thought, oh, maybe if you think of that pyramid as a play field, a character can be hopping on it. I went to Jeff Lee, the artist, in-house artist, who was very talented and had created all these characters just out of his imagination for no particular game because he didn't have a programmer to work with on them. And I said, "Can I use one of your characters?" And he said, "Yeah." And he put a bunch on the screen. I picked the orange guy with the long nose because he looked somewhat pathetic. And he gave me all the angles I needed, and so then I programmed a guy hopping around the screen. So it evolved in that way of one step at a time. But to answer your question, there was no point in the game other than avoiding the balls at first. And it was our VP of engineering, Ron Waxman, who was a very large, rotund man, smoked a cigar, and he would come in and sit behind us in this big open room that was our sort of workroom. It was after hours, and I was just playing around with, having this orange guy hopping around the cube, thinking, what am I going to do next? And he said, "What if the cubes change color when you land on them?" And I thought, oh, there's a goal. Now there's a goal to achieve, and that, to me, that's the moment when it actually became a game. And from that point on, everything that got added was sort of to the purpose of how do we support that goal.
You were the programmer, and you also the designer as much as it was. How important was it to listen to the ideas of other people in the Gottlieb office?
Well, I don't know if it was important or not, but I did it because it was my first game, and I did not presume to know better than anybody. So I always listened to suggestions. I would run them through my brain and think to myself, all right, is that something I can do easily? Easily was a very key part of it. And if it sounded good and it was easy, I would say, yeah, that's cool, let me put that in. But if it didn't sound right, it didn't seem like it fit, I would say, no, thank you, and I would find something else. And, many of the ideas that were thrown out, I did not implement. But
yeah, back then in 1981, 82, is that most games had a fireball. Well, at any point wasn't there the idea that Kubert would actually fire something out of his nose?
Well, certainly he was designed that way. Jeff's intention in making the character was that he would shoot out of his nose.
What exactly are we talking? Shooting out of his nose. Mucus is essentially what we're talking about.
Are you trying to get me to say boogers?
I just like it when any American says boogers. So thank you very much.
Yes,
tell us more about that idea and why you decided maybe not to implement it.
Well, again, the character was created with some idea in Jeff's mind, but this was a game I was programming and designing. So it just didn't work for me on two levels. One, what are you aiming at? How do you aim? What are you shooting? Why are you shooting? I mean, I love the idea, don't get me wrong, I love the idea of shooting something out of the nose. It's hysterical. But it seemed very complicated because this obviously is not genuine 3D. This is a pseudo 3D game. It's completely 2D in reality, so I would have to figure out, without floating point processors, how am I going to do the math to make sure I'm colliding properly and all this stuff. So it just didn't make sense that shooting would be a part of this game. Plus, it was very important to keep it simple. I preferred a game that you could play with one hand, so you could hold a drink in the other hand.
Always useful.
So I didn't want to have buttons or anything like that. I just wanted to keep it simple.
Okay, well, talking about keep it simple. Now, Warren, I would like you to take us behind the scenes. So I've asked Warren to pick out some key images or videos to talk about development. So the first picture you picked, now I presume you picked this one to show that wonderful head of hair and that gorgeous, voluptuous beard. Is that why you picked this one?
Yes, and of course the chest hair exposed, but
that is very early 80s, actually.
Yeah.
You can almost smell it. Okay.
Yeah, and the size of the glasses too.
But anyway, why have you picked
No, that had nothing to do with it. This happens to be the only photograph I have of myself in the midst of developing Qbert. I never thought anything I was doing was worthy of history, so preserving things was not a high priority for me. I was just trying to make my first game. But there are some key things that are actually interesting in here. I'll just point out that this thing here is called the blue box, is what we called it. It is a blue box. It was our development system. It took 9-inch floppy disks. I mean, you know what a floppy disk, but you probably know them as having a little hard case and they're sort of small. But these were genuinely floppy disks that were 9 inches square. It connected to our hardware through a ribbon cable. This was our actual board, the electronics. Now this is interesting as well because I didn't have a cabinet when I was developing it, and so they basically mounted a joystick on the bottom end of a plastic Tupperware container. So I don't know if you know what Tupperware is in this country, but
we have Tupperware parties, don't
okay,
we? We're
yes.
very, very aware of the
So that's
Tupperware
what it is.
scene.
And you can also see that it was mounted up, down, left, right, but I rotated it into a diamond for the game because that was the way you need to move. Up to the right, up to the left. This did throw people. When people tried to play the game in the office, they would rotate it into square and then completely not be able to play. And I'd say, no, you have to rotate it. And they were like, anyway. I guess the only other thing of note is you'll see the pyramid is actually upside down. And the reason for that is I believe I was programming the cocktail version where 2 players sit opposite each other. So the screen has to be programmed to rotate upside down between players, that's all.
That's a slightly better picture of the imaginatively titled blue box.
Yeah, which it has a real name. It's something like the Intel MDS80, or I don't even know what it is anymore.
Okay. The next picture, I want to know why you picked this, which seems to be the expletive that Qbert utters when he falls off the
Right.
So what's particularly significant about this? Because it's actually on the marquee, isn't it?
Yes, that is on an actual marquee. Basically, when I was developing the game, I did not have the name Qbert. It was just, I called it the Cubes game. That's, you know, and I think we have a thing of the code.
Oh, we
which,
do.
Which you,
we
yeah.
do, yes.
And of course, you cannot read this. I know it's very tiny, but if you looked at this, you would see that there's no mention of Qbert or Coily or any of the names. That all came much later. I just called the player, P-L-Y-R. That was my name for the player. But the reason that we had no name for the game, so when it came time to put it out on test, our VP of Business Development, Howard Rubin, a very out-of-the-box thinker, is a nice way to put it, who I love dearly, by the way, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to disparage her, but he said, why don't we call it this? And we were like, what? How are people going to refer to it? He would say, if this game is as good as I think it is, they'll find a way.
Do you think, can I just say, do you think that would have happened, arose by any other name? Do you think that would have happened?
Well, this is years before Prince changed his name
to a symbol,
yeah. Which then became the artist formerly known as Prince. So what would people have called it? The cursing game, the blah, 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 blah. I have no idea.
The nose game. Anyway, we can see how significant. So, now, you picked this particular front cover of a magazine.
Oh, yeah.
Why have you picked this one?
Well, it was interesting because the focus of this article, which came out right after the game was released, the game was very popular upon its release, let's put it that way, instantly. And as an American-made game, most of the hits were Japanese. Most of the popular games were Japanese games. This article made a point that both Joust and Qbert were both hits that came out about the same time, were both American-made games. So they did a profile of Joust and all the makers of Joust. John Newcomer, Eugene Jarvis was involved, Ken Fidesno was the VP of Engineering, and all of their names were in the article. Well, they interviewed us at Gottlieb, and Gottlieb would not let them use our names. So I was referred to as D, the letter D, Ziner, Z-I-N-E-R.
I think we see what they did there.
Yeah, yeah. And Jeff was known as R. Teast,
Brilliant. Whoever wrote that deserves a pay rise.
Yes, and then Dave Thiel, who did the sounds, I consider the three of us the Cubert triumvirate. Dave was referred to as J. Walkman.
I love that one as well. That's such a cool name. Okay.
Little dated. But,
Okay, so can I just ask you on that, did you rather resent the fact that you weren't credited, particularly when other designers from other companies have been credited? Was that annoying?
well, if everybody was not credited on, industry-wide, I think we would have been okay with it. But because, Williams obviously had no problem publishing everybody's names, we were a little resentful, and we expressed that. And I think what happened was, the management sort of changed their tune. So when I did Faster, Harder, More Challenging Cubert, which was the unreleased sequel that came out was done, I shouldn't say it didn't come out because it was never released, but it was done very, very much right on the tail of Cubert, but we were allowed to put a credits page in.
So you were right on the cusp of that
Yeah.
change. You were also on the cusp of video games having a life outside the arcade. And the one more picture you picked here is this picture. So why have you picked this?
Well, again, it's hard to imagine now, but in 1983, Cubert was everywhere. In mainstream news magazines, I don't know if we picked this or not, but it was in Glamour magazine.
Quite rightly so. With that chest hair, I'm not
The New
surprised.
Yorker
Oh, sorry,
magazine.
no, Cuban,
No,
not
it
you.
was
Sorry.
just, and so the licensing department of Gottlieb really jumped on it, and they licensed over 100 products. And nowadays, when I go to a show, I see, I see things like, these products. Sometimes they're little mini museums that have old Cubert things, and sometimes people are selling some vintage Cubert swag.
It even went so far as that you actually made it onto television. So this is only a minute long. This isn't an intro to the Saturday morning TV show.
Yes.
Did you have any involvement?
No, none of us did. Neither Jeff nor David nor I. As far as I know, nobody at Gottlieb had any involvement. They just basically said, "Hey, make a cartoon with this guy." Was that shown ever here? The Saturday morning Super.
I don't think so.
It's
Unless
probably-
anyone tells me otherwise.
But basically, it was a Saturday morning cartoon where they rotated between Cubert, Frogger, Donkey Kong, and there was one other.
Right.
But the thing is, a lot of people after Cubert in the industry who would know us would say to us, "What were you guys smoking when you came up with Cubert?" When we saw this cartoon, we said, "What were these guys smoking when they came up with this cartoon?" Because he had arms, he's wearing a high school Letterman jacket. It was
A lot of issues going on.
Yeah.
Now, thank you. I'm conscious of time, so thank you so much for taking us behind the scenes of a game that I'm sure everyone in the audience have heard of. We're going to now take you behind the scenes of a game that probably you haven't played. It was a game called Us versus Them, and the reason it's particularly interesting, it was a Laserdisc game. So I think the first thing I'd like to ask you, Warren, is that can you recall the moment when you first saw a Laserdisc game, possibly Dragon's Lair, I don't know. And I just wondered what your thoughts were, particularly as someone who I know is interested in movies.
Yes, I do. And Dragon's Lair was the first experience and exposure I had with a Laserdisc. And Laserdisc games felt like they opened up a completely new world. Because obviously we're living in a world with 16 colors and very coarse pixel resolution. Screens were usually 256 pixels by 240 pixels. So to see full video, just like you'd see in a movie theater, was mind-bending and felt like it was the second coming for the industry. And I'm not the only person who felt that way. A lot of people in the industry thought this is going to revolutionize the industry. So Gottlieb jumped on it, as did most other companies, and basically we took our standard hardware, but what we did is replace the background plane with Laserdisc footage from a Laserdisc. And they came out with a game called Mach 3.
Which was very successful.
Very successful. Considered one of the better ones. Now, Dragon's Lair, my opinion of Dragon's Lair was not that high. Because basically it was just a cartoon, and you just basically watched the cartoon at a certain moment, and you had to do it right at the right moment. You had to hit the joystick in a certain direction, and that's how you continued. And I did not find that particularly fun. So I preferred a more interactive experience, and I preferred an experience where computer graphics were overlaid over a background, and Mach 3 did that, but then Dennis Nordman, who was working with Gottlieb at the time as just a designer, he wasn't really an artist and he wasn't really a programmer. Dennis Nordman, by the way, I don't know if any of you know the name, he went on to become one of the legendary pinball makers. In fact, he's a designer of the Elvira game that's in this show right now. But he's still making pinball. Anyway, but at the time, he was a designer and kind of floundering. But he and another guy had come up with this idea of doing a follow-up Laserdisc game to Mach 3. Because, you know, when a Laserdisc game, when any game runs its course, people stop putting money in it. It's cheaper to put in a new game into that cabinet rather than sell a whole other cabinet. So they thought, let's make a kit, we'll put a new game into Mach 3s, so we had the same controls, it was a flying game, and he had this idea of doing something that was kind of like a science fiction movie, like a cheesy science fiction movie. And we, you know, he had this, that was the entire concept.
Right.
And then we got together, and so I sort of brought a little bit of practicality to it, and we massaged it and said, well, how can we actually do this? And this is what we came up with.
I'm interested is that if you haven't played us version then you can play it on main, and you will be surprised how much fun it is and actually how much variety it's got in. But what I want to ask you is that when you were first asked to lead this project, is that did you approach it as a game designer or more like a film director or somewhere sort of vaguely in the middle?
Well, I say first and foremost, I was looking at it as a game designer because that's what it had to be. But then, given the limitations of what we were doing and what we could do with our system, you know, we wanted to make it as interesting as possible. The original game concept, Dennis wanted the game to be like a movie where you were constantly changing angles and cutting to this angle and that angle, dogfights in the sky and all that. And I was like, well, it sounds great, but you know, you can't play that because then a player never knows where they are and where they're aiming. So we compromised and we opted to do levels or waves that would be a single angle, and then the next level would be a different angle. So we actually have like 5 different angles in the game. You could play first person, first, third person. There's a couple of reverse levels. And then to add more variety, we had forest levels where you were flying through a forest. And then we had mothership levels. So we had lots of
There's
levels.
a lot going on in this game. It really is worth playing. And so now, Warren,
I forgot to mention the other thing was he wanted to tell a story.
Yeah.
So we decided to do like 10 to 15-second clips of an actual story with actors at the beginning of a level. Sometimes there's a tag at the end of a level, and as you play, the story gets told.
So time for you to take us behind the scenes. And the first thing you're going to show us is this rather beautiful Polaroid. So what exactly are we looking at here, Warren?
This is a Jeff Lee reference photo. He made the plane out of little cardboard tubing and pinball parts. And you can see it's quite small, but he used these photographs as reference photographs for the actual images that he would hand pixelize, basically. We didn't have tools to digitize anything, so you literally plop down pixels, and he used graph paper to usually do that. And then, but it's really, it looks remarkable in the game, you know, and we needed all these different angles. Directly behind it, a little above it, side-scrolling, so yeah.
There's just something beautifully Blue Peter about that, isn't there? So we've gone from a very small plane to a rather larger plane.
Yes, and a real plane.
That is a real plane, yeah, that was it. So tell us, why are we looking at a picture of a jet?
Well, we needed all of this footage. You know, the game design had us, you know, traveling around the world, or the country at least, and we originally wanted to do landmarks, the Statue of Liberty, Mount Rushmore, the Golden Gate Bridge, things like that. But we can only afford, you know, basically, we hired producers in California, and Dennis and I took a trip to California to show them what we needed. So we went up, I took this photo, I was in this plane. We flew from Los Angeles, Burbank actually, to Arizona, Utah, and we showed them what we need. We did some test runs. We did Lake Powell in Arizona. We did farmland. We did desert. We did clouds, we did all this stuff, and then we told the producers, "Oh, go around to as many places as you can and get similar stuff."
And to say, talk about a hands-on developer here, is that that is you.
That's Dennis Nordman.
Sorry, the beard threw me.
Yes.
I'm sorry about that. But you are in the plane taking this picture.
I took the photo, but that's Dennis Nordman and then one of the crew of the plane. And he's inside this plane, which is not very big, is a camera, a belly camera. So that's the top of the belly camera. The camera's actually sticking out the bottom of the plane, and we could rotate it and angle it and things like that. So that's why we had to explain what we needed. We also realized we had to, even though you're in a Learjet and you're moving very fast, you have to speed up the footage. So for 1 minute of footage, which the levels are about a minute long, we needed to fly in one direction for 5 minutes to get that level.
Were you actually shouting instructions to the pilots from the back of the plane?
Well, I don't know that we were talking directly to the pilots. I think we spoke to the Clay Lacy people and they did the rest. They interpreted.
Well, we're going to go from a plane to a helicopter. So why have you changed vehicles now?
So while the producers that we hired in LA were off going to the West, they actually went to San Francisco and Hawaii, and I think that was pretty much, and Hollywood. They did their own Hollywood shot, going over the Hollywood sign. But we were in Chicago, and we thought, well, Chicago should be represented.
Yeah.
So somehow, I don't know how, I was not involved in the actual producing of any of the stuff, but I was always along. We hired a Steadicam operator who hung out of the side of this helicopter in 26 degrees below zero. Now that's 26 degrees Fahrenheit.
Don't ask me to convert that.
Negative 6
It was
degrees.
cold. It was cold up
It
there.
was cold, yes. And we flew over Chicago and got some Chicago footage. And we actually got permission to fly over the Chicago River, which is all skyscrapers, but we were lower than the skyscrapers. There were skyscrapers.
I think the next thing, you're going to show us some of that footage. So I think that's, that's literally
Now,
the footage there.
This was reversed. So this was actually the end of the run. But yes, we are flying over the Chicago River at a fairly low altitude in a helicopter.
That was terrifying. It really was harder in the old days to make video games.
And that's in the game. And then this is another shot. We got a side-scrolling shot for a different level.
And we even get a little of the interstitials there.
Yes, another part of the game was what we called interstitials, where you would cut away from the main action to see something happening on the ground, which is usually a gag, just for a laugh. And I kind of resisted that for the same reason I resisted changing angles during the level, but people loved the interstitials when they played it.
We have gone from an urban landscape to very much a forest landscape now. So tell us then, what's going on here?
So the game was being developed in the fall of 1983, and Return of the Jedi had come out. And one of the guys that came up with the concept thought, oh, what if we do a forest level like in Return of the Jedi? And he knew of a forest in Kalamazoo, Michigan, where the trees were planted in rows so you could get different kind of angles, and it worked out great. So here's our intrepid Steadicam operator. By the way, I also mentioned the Steadicam was a brand new device in 1983. It had only been out for maybe a year or something like that. And he was one of 2 Steadicam operators in all of Chicago. So.
Okay. And we're going to see some of the footage, is that right? Let's do the raw footage.
Oh yeah.
So
this is raw footage.
Yeah. God, he could
Sped
run.
up.
This guy could run.
Sped up.
Oh, well, sorry, right. Okay.
But the idea here was that he would run and then sort of zoom, move into a tree, which I then would have to isolate in editing. And the idea is your plane had to avoid that tree, which would be in the middle of a screen. So this was I did all the editing on this project, which I loved because, as Paul mentioned, I was always interested in filmmaking. My career could have gone in 2 directions, either filmmaking or computers. It ended up going in computers, but I kind of got my filmmaking Jones here.
You did, and the next thing you want to show us actually alludes to the fact that this is a script. Now, back in 1983, 84, not many video games would have a script, but yours did. So, is that your writing?
Yeah. So, Dennis and another one of the designer guys, Dave Faust, came up with a script, and then I kind of did a pass on it. And the other thing we decided, this is my idea, I thought it'd be more interesting for replayability if certain scenes were filmed twice with different dialogue, different angles. So you'd be playing the game and you'd be like, oh, I sort of saw that scene, but it seems different. And that's what we did.
Brilliant. And we're just going to have one last picture of some of the cut scenes, I think we'd call them now, are in what looks like a kind of command centre as well.
Yes.
So were you there telling the actors, you know, once more with feeling?
Yeah. I directed the actors, and the guy who was from the production company, they built the sets, they did a fantastic job. We hired the actors, we had auditions. In fact, the guy who plays the Robert Stack-like handsome commander was a friend of mine. He was an actor and a model, and he did great. So, but the guy who was directing it, he was making it very boring. And I was like, no, can we give it a little dramatic, drop that camera, have a more exciting angle, and then he didn't know how to direct actors at all, so I was directing the actors.
A dream come true. Now, we're going to move on to game number 3. Now, we've actually got footage here of a game that, again, I think now it's a game that many of our audience would have seen, and it's Nog. But we're not really talking about Nog. You didn't work on Nog. What we are talking about is the whole concept of digitised graphics. Just before we get there, we need to acknowledge that Nog, and some of the games we're going to talk about now, were not made by Gottlieb, they were made by Williams. You left Gottlieb, or Milestar as it's been called. So I just wanted to ask, is that moving from one company to another, was Williams a very different setup from the one you left at Gottlieb?
Yeah, I'd say in some ways it was. I mean, Gottlieb, the reputation of Williams was very much I want to say high testosterone. You're talking about Defender, Stargate, Robotron, Sinistar.
Okay.
I mean, Gottlieb had Kubert.
Okay.
They were looked upon differently, even in their pins, even in their pinball games. Eugene Jarvis was at Williams, and I certainly knew of Eugene Jarvis being in the industry, and he was a god then, with Defender, Stargate, Robotron, and Larry DeMar. And when Gottlieb was shut down, I didn't leave it, they were shut down while I was still an employee, so I didn't have a choice. I left the industry for about 1.5 years, and then I was invited back to join Williams. So there was a slump, and this has to do with arcade history, but around 1984, the arcade industry just died. And Williams ended up firing or letting go a lot of their staff. But then, in 1986, things started picking up again, and so I was hired to be a programmer for Williams.
And initially, you worked on Joust 2, which I think is a great game, much underrated, it has its flaws. But then you get involved in this whole idea of digitised graphics.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about what the tech was like back then?
Sure. Well, again, we thought Laserdisc games were going to change the industry. That did not happen because Laserdisc games were found to be faulty in the field. They would overheat, dust would be a problem, games would skip, people would lose their games, and they just were not ready for prime time. And so it was really a big disappointment, and it kind of led to that big crash I just talked about. So Laserdiscs were no longer there. People were not making or buying Laserdisc games. So what's next? Well, right now, then we're back to 16 colors, but memory's getting cheaper, and so the next step would have been, instead of 4 bits per pixel, which is 16 colors, you go 8 bits per pixel, which is 256 colors.
Which seemed magical at the time.
Yes, so in 1986, Williams was planning a 256 color system. That would be their next system. Eugene Jarvis had left Williams. He was getting an MBA in California. But as it turned out, he came back before that system was finished, and he put his own stamp on it. And we changed the design of that system because of Eugene. And we used a different processor and everything. But my involvement was, I thought, oh wow, with 256 colors, perhaps we could get something a little more photographic. So there were these things coming out for the Amiga digitizers. One was called DigiView, one was called A Squared, and I started experimenting with this to see if, how to make digitized images and if we could actually reduce the number of colors from thousands to something that would fit into our newly 256 thing. And that work continued and evolved for many years, and resulted in
I say,
games we
I've
have.
shown another game, perhaps one that's, you know, at that time was perhaps the most associated with this whole new technology of digitising graphics, which is, of course, Mortal Kombat. Can you tell us how, again, now you've been making games, you've been the lead designer. This is definitely a different role. You're providing the tech behind it.
Yeah.
Did that feel strange to you, not being in the same kind of role?
Well, I just wasn't working on Mortal Kombat because other people were. So I was, you know, this whole thing of making a digitizing system was sort of a side gig. So, you know, well, after Joust 2, Williams, we created, Eugene Jarvis and I and the other couple of programmers that were there at the time, made the operating system, the display system, and then basically we split up into two teams. And George Petro and Eugene and Jack Hager worked on NARC, and myself and John Newcomer of Joust fame worked on another game called USSA, which was a tank game, a digitized tank game, digitized images, which never got released. So the tools were just something I was doing on the side. I was always working on a game. It turns out I actually left Williams after that point. I went off and did Exterminator for another company, but then I was invited back to Williams in the middle of Terminator 2. Now, I had thought that they would have had somebody improving the digitizing system while I was gone for 2.5 years, but they did not. And memory was cheaper, the systems were better, and I was like, okay, so I went back on it and started making better digitizing
Well, let's
systems.
do. So we'll now take us behind the scenes and let's talk about that tech.
Oh.
So here's some kind of technology that you're going to tell us what the hell it is.
Yes, I know it's such an exciting photo. It's a printed circuit board with all these components on it. Well, this is the Targa Plus. The Targa Plus is a digitizing board. And the thing that was so cool about it is that it came with a software development kit, which meant I could write my own program and control it. And that's what I did. And we go to the next picture. So I wrote a program called WTarg, which basically controlled the camera. You could turn the camera on, digitize things. Now again, it's not like today where you get full motion video instantly. We had, you know, the speed of this was slow. Maybe you might get 10 frames a second if you had action, but it was probably best if you just had something still and you could just take a frame and then, you know, almost like stop motion. It was ideal for that. And you could turn frames on and off, and you could go forward and backward, and it allowed you to do a lot of things. And it continued to develop over the years.
Can I just ask, is it called WTarg? Is that after Warren?
If you want.
It is now. Okay.
Well, no,
Okay.
it was Williams.
Oh, there's Warren. It's definitely Warren. We've got. You picked this image next, which
Yeah.
makes me smile. Why have you picked this?
Well, this is a digitized image that was processed down to, like, I don't know, maybe 4 or 8 colors by one of the artists. But this is of our hardware designer. This is the guy who actually designed the hardware, Mark Lafredo, who frequently played parts of characters in our games.
It seems to have really thrown himself into that drug dealer in Nog.
Yeah,
kind
he's
of role
the
there.
bad
Is he
guy.
drawing
Yeah.
from life there at all? Or is that? We're not going to talk about that. So that was from Nog. We're going to move on now to So that's not from Nog, is it?
No. So again, this is from Mortal Kombat. The original Mortal Kombat used probably the crudest version of the digitizing system, and they, you know, obviously to have people flying, they would have to sort of hold a pose, and you know, they would have to manually strip out all of the background, and you know, Mortal Kombat, if you don't know, was made by 2 guys. John Tobias was the artist, and Ed Boon was the programmer. And John wisely. And one of the brilliant things that he did is he made the characters very large, and he broke their body parts up into pieces that he could control independently. So,
Can I say, I love this picture. And is that person just balancing precariously on those 3 steps?
yes, yeah,
That was just beautiful.
Yeah.
Now that's the original Mortal Kombat.
Yeah.
You wanted to show this image next, to show, this is for Mortal Kombat 3.
yeah. That's
So-
actually a silhouette of Ed Boon directing Rich DeVizio, who's playing some Kang or somebody. Yeah. So, but this was Mortal Kombat 3, where the system had actually developed quite a bit. We had much better color resolution. The characters could have their own palettes, as opposed to all characters sharing a palette. And we had a blue screen. We actually built a blue screen studio at that point. So, and the new version of the Targa board had chroma key. So you could actually strip out backgrounds a little bit quicker, a little bit easier.
Okay. The next image you've chosen is this one, which is
Yes.
Goro, I believe.
Yes, yes.
So why have you chosen this one?
So there's a little story behind this. This is a full screen image from the attract mode of the original Mortal Kombat. And even though I didn't work on the game, Ed Boon did come to me one day and he said, Warren, I really want to put this image of Goro in the attract mode, but you know, it's just too big. It's a digitized image and it will take up all of our memory. Do you know of any compression algorithms? Can we somehow get it compressed? And I said, well, let me take a look and see what I can find. So I did find a compression algorithm, compressed it. The data was small enough that he could put it in the game. I gave him the decompression algorithm to include, and poof, it's in the attract mode. So then I said to him, well, yes, but you're going to have to pay me a royalty now on Mortal Kombat, jokingly. And months later, when Mortal Kombat was a huge success, I got a very large check as a thank you.
Well,
I don't know if it had to do with what I said. It might have just, I really don't know.
Okay. It wasn't the only game that this technology contributed to. Here we are, NBA Jam. And once again, Mr. Warren Davis is getting his cheeky little face in the game. So that's you there, isn't it?
Yes, so I don't know if you know, but in the NBA Jam Tournament Edition, it is possible to play secret characters. And in the arcade version, many of those characters are the people who worked at Williams. So I was one of them, and I remember I was just at my office working, you know, doing whatever I was doing, and somebody came in, hey, can you come to the studio for a little bit? Sure. And so they said, we're going to put you in the game. So basically, I just had to stand in a spot and rotate, and they got 8 angles of me. And you can, if you put in my initials and birthday, I will come up as the player, and then my head is actually on the body of the player during the game.
Who needs Michael Jordan when you've got Warren Davis? We talking about mixing with the stars somewhat. We're going to move on to game number 4. Now, again, this is a game that I think plenty of our audience will remember, not always for the right reason. Ooh. This is Revolution X. So I think that the first thing I want to ask is, this is a gun game, although not your first gun game. You had worked on Terminator 2. I just wondered what you learned from that project that you then took to this project.
Well, Terminator 2 was in process when I was rehired at Williams. I came to replace another programmer who had quit, but because I was familiar with the system, they thought I'd come up to speed quickly, which I did. And I also improved the digitizing system for Terminator 2 and was able to use clips in the movie using the compression I had learned from Mortal Kombat. So a lot of that stuff, but the side-scrolling, the multiplanar side-scrolling in Terminator 2 I thought was a little limiting, and I thought it would be nicer to have a little bit more freedom. So I came up with this background system for Revolution X that lets you move in 6 directions: forward, backward, side, up, down. You can even have, you're on rails basically, so you can pre-program a path for the camera, which we had a tool that let you do that, so you could see where you were going and all that. It was a beautiful tool. And everything is billboards. It's not, again, not real 3D. It's pseudo 3D. But, and yeah, I don't know, what else can I say? Yeah.
Well, I just want to ask you then.
And we had Aerosmith.
Well, yeah, I mean, Eric, so when someone said, we are going to put Aerosmith in a game, did you think genius or bonkers?
Oh, genius, my God, yeah. Aerosmith was one of the biggest bands at the time. It's like, if we can get them, that's a huge get.
And of course, actually at the time, both Steve Tyler and Joe Perry were known as the Toxic Twins, I understand, due to their industrial levels of consumption of drugs and alcohol. So I presume you thought we're going to be able to party like it's 1999.
No. Oh, no, they were clean by then. They had gone clean. Yes, the catering, it was all very healthy stuff, and things like wheatgrass juice and stuff. They were totally clean.
Wheatgrass juice is not a code for meth or something. It's literally wheatgrass juice.
I don't know what it is in this country.
Okay, Warren, take us behind the scenes. And the first picture we're going to show you is this is a promo for the game, I believe.
Yeah, this is a little promo for the game. And you'll see me in it. I'll pop up a couple of times. My role during the shoot with Aerosmith was of the clapboard, the scene. So that's me. There was me. And we had them for 3 13-hour days in our studio, our Boost Week studio.
Can I ask you one? Did they, I mean, they're a massive band, did they just dial their performances in, or did they really, get involved or what?
Oh, they were involved. No, they were totally into it and did everything that George and Jack Hager and George Petro were the leads on the project. I was a senior programmer, and they did everything. They were so enthusiastic and cooperative, and yeah, it was just fun. It was a grueling but fun shoot.
Fantastic. We'll just go on to, I believe that is Steve Tyler. So, come on, these are household names. So, did you get a hangout with Steve? What was he like?
Again, they were all totally down to earth and pleasant. In fact, they gave us tickets to one of their concerts when they came back a couple of months later. So a lot of us got to go see the concert. That's Carrie Hoskins, Carrie Hoskins was in so many Williams games. It's incredible. She always pops up, Mortal Kombat 3 at least, if not 2, NBA Jam. She's a cheerleader, and she was Mistress Helga. In addition to being the bikini dancer in Revolution X, they loved her, and she was also game for anything, whatever we asked her.
Fantastic. Talk about game for anything. Now, I think is that Joe Perry?
That's
I'm
Joe
not
Perry.
into hair metal, so I need some help there. So I see there that I would say that he's there having his hair done.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm thinking, judging by the amount of hair, was that a lengthy process?
I don't recall the time, Paul. I was not heavily involved in the makeup side of things.
I was really hoping that you'd actually applied some of that makeup. How disappointing one. But it sounds exactly like a film shoot, the fact that you've got hair and makeup and a clapperboard. So again, did you feel like you were like, hey, hang on, now I am being that film director that, I once alluded to?
Being the clapboard guy is not the most glamorous job. But no, listen, I was very happy to be there. We all understood we had to play our roles because there were a lot of things that had to get done.
Okay.
And that's Jack Hager standing on the right, by the way.
Well, actually, we'll skip a bit because we wanted to... that's you with the famous clipperboard.
Well, there's a story here, too. Just, that's me in the clapboard, but I'm standing with Tom Hamilton, who is the bass player. But Tom Hamilton was my celebrity urination story.
Well, you didn't think you were going to leave without a celebrity urination story.
Everybody should have
this is not a length story.
Celebrity urination story. And no, I was in the bathroom at the urinal, and Tom Hamilton just walks in, plops himself next to me, and we just start talking. And it was very surreal to be talking to a famous rock star while you're peeing.
Did you maintain eye contact throughout?
I was trying not to.
Let's move on.
Say no more.
Okay.
I will say no more.
You're very good, actually, Warren, seriously, at always crediting the other people that are involved in projects. So the next couple of pictures, I believe you've chosen for that very reason. Who are we looking at here?
So this is Jack Hager, who was our lead artist on Revolution X, as was on Terminator 2. Jack is an incredibly talented man. And then, of course, Steven Tyler.
Okay. And also... And
this is George Petro. George was the programming lead, again, from T2. We basically took the T2 team and rolled it into Revolution X. It's essentially the same team.
Okay. Let's have a look at that team.
Yeah. So this is, I love this photo, but this is our Revolution X team with Steve Tyler, who is touching my back. So just remember that.
So what, in case it goes to court? Just the back.
I gave him permission.
That was consent is everything, people.
Yeah.
Can I just say, it looks like a really happy team. Do you have very happy memories of that time?
Absolutely, absolutely. It was surreal. It was amazing. I mean, and honestly, other things would happen too. Celebrities would be through our offices all the time. A lot of them were doing voices for the pinball machines. So, if we were doing the Addams Family, the actors from the Addams Family would come to record dialogue for us and things like that. The other thing, I will mention this. We did have Steven Tyler. People were having Steven Tyler call their wives.
He may have known them already, actually.
But yeah, no, they were so cool. They were very cool.
Okay. Now, of course, making a game is all about the team, Warren. It's all about the team. And yes, hang on, you managed to get your own little cameo there.
Listen,
in Revolution X.
For the amount of years I was in the video game industry, you will find me in very few video games. I inserted myself very little. But if you've ever played Revolution X, in the jungle level, when you go into the building, there's this guy behind the desk who immediately ducks down. There's barely time to register this person, and it's me. But, and then I start lobbing grenades at you, which you cannot, you can shoot the grenades, but you can't shoot me or the desk. You have to shoot the chains on top of the sign. That's how you get rid of it.
Of course you do. You will not be lobbing grenades at all. Now, I'm going to finish now. We're on the fifth and final game, but I'm absolutely delighted about this because I know this is a retro show, okay, but right, after Williams, you stayed in the industry. You worked for Disney a while, and also you worked for Universal Studios, I think, on Spyro. So you stayed in the industry for a while.
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
Till about 2008.
2008, okay, so now that's 16 years later. Oh my God, we've got a new Warren Davis game. So I suppose my first question is, what lured you back to making games after all those years?
Well, I have a friend who runs a company called Tribble Toys. And he's been bugging me for years, probably about 10 years, to make a Tribble-themed game. And I always said, yeah, well, you know, because I know he has no money. And I was, you know, making a game is not something you just do, you know, I don't do in my spare time. So he, you know, like I said, bugging me for years. He eventually did go to somebody who did a game for him, and he was not happy with the way that turned out. And it just turned out last year sometime, I was just thinking about Tribbles and what a Tribble game might be, and I came up with this idea, a very simple idea, and I was able to mock it up in Unity in about 2 days. It's a simple game where you either feed Tribbles to make them multiply, or you withhold food from them to make them die. And the idea is you've got a target number of Tribbles you're trying to maintain. You have to reach a certain target population. And that's all you do. You either feed them or don't feed them. And you have a certain amount of time to get to this population. So I pitched it to him, and he said, sure. And I hooked up with I'm not having any experience making phone games. I knew a little about Unity, but not so much about making phone games. So I found a couple of people I had met at Free Play Florida, who I knew ran their own little company, were interested in making arcade games. And I asked if they would like to work on this. And they said yes, so the three of us developed this game, which is called Hungry Tribbles.
Yeah. And it is free to download.
It's absolutely free
to
download.
I would urge you to play the latest Warren Davis game. Can I just ask you a couple of questions, and then we'll go over to the audience? Is that just how different is making a game in 2023, 24, as opposed to 1982 when you began? What's the same and what's different maybe?
Oh my God, it's so different. It's complete. Well, you know, a platform like Unity does so much for you. You still obviously have to do a lot, but it does so much for you, and of course the unlimited colors, you know, digitizing is so much of an easier process. Yeah, in certain ways it's much, much easier. However, you have this platform, you've got Android and you've got iOS, and they each have their own little difference. Now, Unity is wonderful. You just sort of export to the platform you need, but there's all of these things you've got to know. And down the road, Google can change something, and suddenly your game will no longer work because they've changed some library. And so, whereas, you know, I remember games, I was done with Qbert. You can still play Qbert today, 42 years later. It's not changed at all. But any game that I make now, it cannot stay. You know, it might have to evolve, and it requires stuff. Plus, things like a global leaderboard.
Yeah.
We have yet to put it in. We'd like to put in a global leaderboard so everybody who plays can see how other people are doing with their scores. But it's a third-party service. You know, you can't just do that yourself. I mean, you could, but it's much more expensive.
For the last time, we're going to take us behind the scenes, very limited behind the scenes. This one, is there just who's this guy, Warren?
So this is David Gerald. He is a science fiction writer who wrote the original The Trouble with Tribbles episode of Star Trek. My understanding, I don't know the details of this story, but at some point there was a lawsuit between him and Paramount, who owns Star Trek, and he walked away with the rights to use Tribbles for his own purposes.
That sounds sordid, but okay.
He started Tribble Games with my friend Miles, and you know, he's sort of the silent partner, and Miles runs the company.
Fantastic. And the last shot there is that I thought this was a good indication of how making games is different, because of course Happy Tribbles is free, but
Hungry Tribbles.
Hungry,
Paul,
sorry.
Hungry Tribbles.
I'm very happy with Hungry Tribbles. I'm sorry about that. Is that, however, it's got to generate some income, and that can be through in-app purchases, or it has ads that you can pay to get rid of. And I wondered whether it was difficult for someone like you, who started off making games where people just put in their quarter or 10 pence for us, to now kind of have to get revenue a different way. Was that a bit of a challenge?
I wouldn't call it a challenge. It's different, and you do what you have to do. So we have ads, and you can pay a small amount to go ad free. We have links to the website where they sell his tribbles. Now the other thing I'll mention. So this is his website, and he actually sells these tribbles. You can buy them online. He goes to a lot of Comic-Cons, although not in the UK, and you can physically buy these tribbles. And these are the tribbles that are used in the game. So there are up to 10 tribbles in the game. You can use 4. There are 4 standard tribbles. 6 you can purchase a one-time small fee to add different tribbles to your library. And all of these tribbles are purchasable through his website. You can actually have a physical tribble in your hand.
I'm going to ask one last question before throwing it out to the audience. And so now you are back making games. Is this just the start of it? Let me finish the question before you shake your head, Warren. Okay. I just thought that this might be an opportunity to revisit some of the many games you've worked on in the past. So is it the start of the next phase of your game making career?
No.
Okay. Is there a reason why?
I want to say making games is a young man's game. No, that's not true. That's not true. If I was inspired to make another game, I would make another game. To me, it's all about inspiration. If I don't make games like just for the hell of it, to pass the time. I make them because I enjoy what I do.
Well, thank you for sharing all the years of enjoying that doing. Ladies and gentlemen, can we have a big round of applause for Warren David? We're very good at deadlines, because that's bang on 3, but I'm just going to throw it out, and I believe we've got, so we can perhaps take about 3 or 4 questions from the audience. So please, if anyone would like a question, could you indicate in the old-fashioned way of sticking your hand in the air? So we've got one there, thank you, and one over here. So we've got 3. Okay, yeah.
Hi, Ron. I just wanted to ask you about, thank you so much for Cuba, and also Us vs. Them, which, as Paul said, is an absolutely brilliant game. I also wanted to ask about Exterminator. I mean, that's one of the strangest arcade games that I can think of. What was the idea behind that title?
I was in a bad mood. No. We were tasked, I was tasked with, I was working with a couple of old Gottlieb colleagues who had formed a small company called Pixel Lab. And we were tasked by Premier Technologies, which was actually the remnants of Gottlieb's pinball department, rising from the ashes to make more pinballs. Gil Pollock, who ran that company, decided to make a video game, and so he hired us to make a system. There was an old game that I made at Gottlieb, not to release, but just for fun. It was basically a game with disembodied hands that when you could use the joystick to move it around the screen, and there were flies. There were flies just flying around, and if you positioned yourself behind a fly and pressed the button on the joystick, your hand would close, and if you got the fly, when you opened up, a dead fly would just drop. This was enormously popular at Gottlieb. We just had it running in the office, and I pitched it as a game, one of like 3 or 4 ideas to Gil Pollock, just to sort of flesh out the pitch. I did not intend for him to pick that game. And that's what he picked. We'll do that hand game. So that evolved into Exterminator. That's why.
Another fascinating game, Kim, you're right, it's one worth seeing, a great oddity. We've got another question here, and then I've got one at the back.
I seem to remember from the Ted Dabney interview, you mentioned that Gottlieb tried to get SIDs from Commodore, but they said, fine. SID chips, the sound chips.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that would have made a big difference to the quality of the sound in the games back then?
It's hard to say. I don't know. I try not to dabble in what ifs, Yeah. Because I'm not that prescient. Sorry. Yeah, I don't know.
Thank you, that's a great question. Okay, and we've got one more here at the back.
Hi there, Warren. Just a quick question regarding Qbert and obviously the way that games have changed in the digital era as we are now. Is there anything that you would ever want to add or change with Qbert at this point for reimagination, or is there anything else that you would be planning on ever adding or amending to the game?
I would definitely leave the original alone. I did faster, harder, more challenging Qbert, which was my attempt at addressing what I saw were flaws in the original game. Whether or not there were flaws in the original game is up for grabs, because some people love it as is. They find faster, harder, more challenging Qbert too difficult. That's fine. But at least they're both out there now. But I actually was in talks with Sony for about a year about doing a modern Qbert game, because Sony owns the rights. I've never owned the rights. And they seemed to be interested, and we were progressing along those lines. And I had a game design. I had both a console game and a VR game design that I was very excited about getting into, but abruptly they decided they did not want to do a Qbert game for whatever reason. So yeah, there are things because part of my disappointment is that over the years, all anybody has done is sort of rehash the original game. No one's actually done anything truly original with the character. And I have lots of ideas about what to do with the character. So I was hoping we would get something done, but sadly.
It's never too late. It's not a young man's game.
Not a young man's game.
Can I just say, if you would like to know lots more about all the games that, apart from Hungry Tribbles, all the games we've talked about today, please can I recommend this absolutely brilliant book called Understanding Creating Qbert. Some fantastic stories, some fantastic insights. You write really beautifully, my friend. Lots of pictures as well. Warren will be in the desk at the Traders Hall over in the main area there. He would love it to continue the conversation. He would love it because these are bloody heavy and he does not want to take any back on the plane to the west coast of America. So come on, people. Think of his baggage, right? Okay. So honestly, it would be wonderful if you went over to the desk where you'll also find posters, cards, things like that. Can I just do a few thank yous? Can I thank the wonderful team at Play Expo, that's Andy, Steve, all the people that put this amazing show on. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you all for coming. Thank you particularly to Tammy, Warren's wife, who has been dragged this side of the pond, has come to support her husband in this whole process. Can I say thanks again to our mate Martin, who puts all this stuff together. And if you do want to hear more of Warren speaking, he was on the very first episode of our podcast, The Ted Dabney Experience. But the biggest thank you, okay, is to Mr. Warren Davis. Thank you, Warren.
Now it's my turn. It's my turn to thank Paul. Paul's been a supporter and a friend for many years. The last time I was at Play Expo was in Manchester in 2015. Paul was there on stage with me as well. So thank you to Paul for putting this together and helping me do this. Fantastic to be with you as always. And a special thanks to all of you. Thank you for being here. Those of you, I can recognize most of you who've been at my table. Thank you for coming by. If you bought the book, thank you for that. Just thank you for remembering the games, which was disposable entertainment when it was made in 1982 and somehow is still here. Thank you all. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day at Play Expo Blackpool 2024.
Don't play the game.